Hey everybody. So I am going to talk to you about iBeacons, and some of you may have heard of those and maybe know something about it. Some of you may have only just started to be aware of the concept of these strange little devices or the protocol, or not really know much about them. But I'm going to try and just kind of pull back the veil and explain a little bit of what they are and why they might conceivably be useful to you. So I am an IT manager for a university, mid-sized university in New Zealand, and I have been dealing with Macs since the bad old days of OS9, and the only solution I could give to people was delete your preferences and pray. Then OS10 came around, and we were back. I hand-rolled plist files for podcast producer, and I thought augment records for Active Directory sounded like a great idea, and I tried to get that to work as well, and that doesn't work. They're terrible. And we used Open Directory and MCX plist files that we'd make ourselves and try and import onto. Thank God for Casper. So we have used Casper now for a couple of years. We have 9 CCAs, 9 CCTs, and we've finally got our first CCE person on staff. Not me, sadly. I took one look at that test and went, no, you can do it, Richard. But by employing Casper, there is a whole range of technologies and infrastructure that we've just been able to knock on the head, don't need it anymore. We used to have monolithic imaging. We used to have all kinds of technologies that we would use to try and manage the user experience from device start to device end of life. We don't have to worry about that anymore. So we use Casper for everything, essentially. Which is kind of the reason why we've started exploring its use for iBeacons. Because Casper is almost our one-stop shop for every single thing we want to try and do. So what the hell is a beacon? Well, that is, believe it or not, the actual symbol for iBeacons that Apple uses. You've probably never seen it before because they announced it a couple of years back, and then it's just become sort of a background technology. One of the nice things about iBeacons is it's more of a protocol than a device. So it's not one of the things that Apple can just kind of pull the rug out from under you and oh, it's gone this week. It's around, it's here to stay. It's part of the Bluetooth 4 set, smart Bluetooth, you might have heard it called. So we're going to talk about what Bluetooth beacons are, and then we're going to talk about how you can configure your JSS to use them. We're going to talk about the different types of devices that are around that can act as beacons, and then we're going to talk about how they're actually useful to you. Conceivably useful, anyway. So a Bluetooth beacon is a device that is supposed to tell something else where you are, essentially. So that was the initial conceit of them, was that they would be used to tell a device you have arrived in a particular location, and we are going to try and push some information to you. It was originally designed for going into a store. This was Apple's great idea. You would walk into a shop, and you would walk up to a rack of clothes, and because you had that shop's app on your device, it would bling and say, oh, you're in front of the hosiery selection, and here's what's currently in style, and here's what's currently on special, and give this code to someone at the front desk, and you get 5% off, and, advertising like that. So the ideas behind it are geofencing and microlocations. So those are hopefully terms you've heard of before. You've all heard of Wi-Fi positioning and using a GPS to discover your location. Neither one of those work particularly well when we're talking about either indoor locations or ranges below 150 meters. So to narrow down the location of a device and push information in when we're talking about an area of, say, 5 meters or less, you really need to use a much lower power, much more defined signal. And that signal is a Bluetooth beacon, or an iBeacon, as Apple calls it. Now, there are other types of beacons. In fact, you've probably heard that Google has just announced their own one, which I forget the name of. There is no reason why an iBeacon can't work on an Android device and an Android beacon can't work on an iOS device and vice versa. It's a protocol, not a fixed device set. Having said that, on iOS, iBeacons are recognized by the operating system. On Android, Google's implementation is recognized by the Android operating system. But you can still do things at the app level. And you can use it for a number of, finding your keys is a real thing these things can do. You might have heard of the Tile device. It's a little wee plastic widget you put on your keys. It's just a Bluetooth beacon. And one of the nice things about these little Bluetooth 4 devices is that the battery lasts forever. I mean, it just goes on and on. So we're talking 2-3 years on a little watch battery. So the Tile is just a little beacon that pushes out a standard iBeacon signal. You load up the Tile device on your phone, you walk around, hot, 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 there's your keys. So this is a little demo video I like. So this is using Estimote. Estimote is a company, and their iBeacons in a museum. So basically what happens is people walk into the museum, they're handed a device with the app on it for the museum, or they install the app on their own device. And they walk around the various areas and so there's a little beacon there on the wall. Now, the beacon itself is not pushing any information to that device. Instead, the app has that information already, and it knows to load it up because it's come in contact with the beacon. So you can push out context-specific information to a person using with that app as they get close to a particular thing. So this, you can see in this example, this person has just walked up to a painting, and it's shown them a little quiz. Or here's a little pop-up explaining some information about the painting the person's in front of, and who painted it, and, you know. So it's very powerful for enhancing the experience that people have when exploring an area, when going into a new geographic area, and finding out more about that location. That was the initial idea. It can do more than that, but we'll get to that. So in order for iBeacons to work in iOS, you need to have an iPhone 4S or greater, as hopefully most of us do by now. You need to have Bluetooth turned on. It only works if Bluetooth is on. You need location services on. You've got to be running iOS 7 or greater. And if you want to use any of the JSS functionality with iBeacons, you've got to have the self-service app on your iOS device and have loaded it once. The reason for that is once the app is loaded, then it tells the operating system, the iOS operating system, about all the beacons that the JSS knows about, and the operating system that can then take over for monitoring for those beacons. In OS X, you simply have to have a Bluetooth 4 compatible Mac and some kind of background daemon service that's monitoring for them. Yeah? Nice and easy. So one of the really cool things about iBeacons is that it can trigger the app that's associated with it without the app even running. So you can, and I'm not talking about it's running in the background, I'm talking about it's not running at all. You can cold start an iPhone, walk up to a beacon, and because the iOS operating system is what's actually monitoring for the beacon, it knows to go and, when it sees a beacon, it consults its list to see if it's one of the ones that an app that's installed on it is registered against. If it has, then it loads that app in the background, and there's a whole range of tasks. We're getting into the nuts and bolts of things now, but there's a whole range of tasks you can tell your app to do on the device, like pop up a notification, play a sound, load something in the background, start a background process going. In this case, you can see there's a little notifier on the lock screen, so the phone will go blah, blah, bling, and there's a little notifier down in the bottom corner. If the user touches that, it takes him directly into the app that's been triggered by the iBeacon. So this is actually the Apple Store app, which is iBeacon specific. You can wander into an Apple store if you've got this on, and you will get this kind of iBeacon functionality. So one of the apps on your phones that you've all got but probably don't use very much, I use it a little bit, is what was called Passbook, now it's called Wallet. So you can use that for tickets and concerts and holding business cards. I like to use it to give people my business card. So this is just a little card I wrote. It's got my contact information on it, little barcode there. It's also beacon aware. So the idea for this is you can code these pass cards so that when you arrive at a venue, if they're running an iBeacon, it'll pop up and say, oh, here's your ticket for this event, you've arrived, and there's 5 minutes to go until you've got to be seated, blah, blah, blah. So here's all of the code you need to put into a passkit code in order for it to work. I've got some information there about the beacon that triggers it, which I'll get into shortly. A little bit of text that will pop up, the relevant text section. Now my idea is people will install my business card, right, on their phone, and then when I arrive at a venue, I'll just set my phone to start broadcasting the beacon, and my business card will pop up on people's devices. So yeah, if I'm in a conference and people I know have met me before, I can wander around the room and people's phones will be going dingle dingle. So it's a bit viral. I'm trying to spread myself around a little bit, get people to notice me. So if anyone wants to give this a try, just load it. Well, I'll only leave this up for a few seconds, but just crank up Passbook or Wallet and scan that QR code. And then I'm not really allowed to leave the red carpet, so just get that scanned. It should download the pass kit, my business card onto your device, and then after the presentation, just come up and we'll see if we can trigger it on your device. This is the only interactive thing I'm going to try and do. So we'll just leave this up for a few seconds. Hopefully it's big enough. Everyone got it? Great. Okay, we'll move on. If you haven't got it, then I'll throw it up again later. Oh, okay. I heard a few ahs. We'll just bring it back real quick. All right, 10, 9, 8. Okay, so let's move on. So, Bluetooth devices work in two modes. We've got central devices, and those are devices that are pushing out information. And then you've got peripheral devices, and these are receivers, client devices. So in terms of Bluetooth 4 and iBeacon compatibility, we are talking about Macs, we're talking about iOS devices, and the new Apple Watch. So Watch OS 2 does support iBeacons and Bluetooth 4. I haven't seen any applications of it yet, but I'm very excited by that because it does mean that you can walk into a venue and have people's wrists vibrating away. So. And there are a number of different types of things that can be beacons. So my favorite is this one here. It's called a GemTot. It's USB powered, which means it doesn't need a battery at all. You just plug into any kind of USB power source. I put them on TVs. So we've got a lot of digital signage scattered around my university. I just plug them into the side of TVs. And bingo, forget about it. No one's ever going to notice it or steal it. These are the Estimotes. These are the old style, very popular beacons. They're just plastic boxes you glue to the wall. This is their new version of it. They're stickers. So even slimmer, even less obtrusive. And there are, of course, the Bluetooth functionality you can get in some APNs. And finally, any iOS device can also broadcast as a beacon. So you can get apps that allow you, that can be a beacon as well. So iOS devices usually are receiving information from a beacon, but they can also broadcast and be a beacon. So I'll try not to bore you too much with this section, but I wanted to explain a little bit about what a Bluetooth beacon payload looks like. So essentially, you've got these devices, and they broadcast a Bluetooth signal, which is very simple. It's a header frame, the MAC address of the device, the PDU, which is the payload, and a little indicator showing how strong the signal it's trying to broadcast is. The interesting thing is in this PDU section here. That's where the iBeacon protocol lives. So the first part of the iBeacon protocol is the prefix, which basically says, hey, I'm of Apple's beacon protocol. So any client peripheral device that receives that knows, oh, that's a beacon. I'm going to need to consult my database of saved beacons to see if this is a beacon I know about. The next part is the proximity unique identifier. So that is what is consulted in the database, and it basically designates the company or the class of device. So it's an enormous 128-bit string, and you can create your own, but most companies have their own specific one. So Estimate would have their own, Tukinus have their own, but there's so many available, you can just create your own. The major number is a simple 32-bit number that interrelates a group of beacons within that class, that company. And finally, the minor code is used for designating a specific beacon. So basically, the whole thing is just, I'm a beacon, the rest of it is some kind of unique identifier for that beacon, but there's contextual information inside it, just like you get with an IP address, you know? So if we're looking at an example of how that might be used, well, we've got an Estimate beacon here. It's broadcasting a major and minor code, and hopefully there's an app which triggers it. What kind of app could it be? So the beacon goes off, and I'm wandering around with my app, and in this case, the beacon is on the back of a fridge. My iOS app looks through the list of, yes, there's a beacon a beacon class I know about. Here's the major code, and here's the minor code that I'm receiving. So I know which app to load, and it is FunFridge. And I know it's FunFridge 23 I'm in front of. So it loads up the webcam inside the fridge and shows you the contents and the temperature and everything else. Wouldn't that be neat? Yeah, okay, that's not the greatest use case in the world, but you get the idea. So how does this work with the JSS? So essentially, first of all, you've got to configure your JSS to actually know about what the heck a beacon is. So that's very simple. You've got to do it twice. You go into computer management, inventory collection, and then you tell it you want to monitor the beacon, you want it to monitor for iBeacons. Yeah, nice and easy. Then you do the same thing for the mobile device side. Under network organization, you go into the iBeacons area, and you simply create a new beacon. So this is where you're telling it the kind of beacons that you want it to be watching out for. So I'm creating a beacon here. So this is a beacon that's going into meeting room 12. So this would be a beacon that would trigger a particular action when someone walked into meeting room 12 in this case. The UUID field is that proximity UUID I talked about before that designates the class of the beacon. The major and minor values in this case in the JSS are optional. You probably do want to populate those, but you can, if you just leave them set at include any value, the device will be triggered by this beacon. The enrolled device will be triggered by this beacon, regardless of the major and minor code. If you want to be more specific, if you're going to have multiple beacons of that device code, that's when you populate those major and minor codes. And if none of that made any sense, and don't worry, question time's coming. So to trigger an action in the JSS, you need to set up a custom trigger called beacon state change. So you've all been in you all know in the JSS there is a trigger on self-service, trigger on a recurring schedule, trigger on login startup. This is a custom trigger, and you just type the word beacon state change, and that means I've seen a beacon and I've recognized it. So that triggers twice, not once. It triggers when you enter the beacon region. It also triggers when you exit the beacon region. So there's a couple little problems with that approach. It doesn't take into account beacon range. So iBeacons are very cool in that they've got 3 different ranges. You're standing on top of it, you're within 5 meters of it, and you're within 75 meters of it. Unfortunately, you can't get that granular level of functionality in a JSS trigger beacon, but I'm hoping that comes in. We also don't know whether we entered or exited the beacon when you use the JSS. You can work around that with the search criterion using exclusions and limitations, but it would be very neat if in the future we could walk up to a beacon and have the JSS tell us that you've entered the beacon region and exited it. At the moment, it's just the state of the beacon has changed. So not quite there yet, but we're getting there. You also can't create smart groups yet in the JSS for whether or not a device is in the beacon, but you can create an advanced saved search for categorizing devices that can and cannot see a beacon. So to do that, you just create a new search criteria, can see the iBeacon, yeah. So all you have to do is find the iBeacon region parameter in your JSS. And you can see you can set multiple criteria. So what I've got here is I've got a multiple step beacon, so it has to be able to trigger this action. I have to be able to see, to join the saved search. I have to be able to see two beacons, the Allen Hall room beacon and the create room beacon. So this is a beacon that's being broadcast by a device. This is a beacon that's being broadcast by a room. So it's not just enough to be in the room. There also has to be another beacon that's running in the room as well. So that's usually a presenter that started some action. And this beacon can't be seen. So you can say two beacons must be visible, and I must not be able to see this one before whatever triggered action I want goes off, or I join that advanced search. So if I wanted to create a policy, a device policy for my beacon, it's pretty simple. I go into my JSS and I would create one here. Allen Hall beacon welcome. So this is just basically a notification to people, hey, you've arrived in the Allen Hall room. Here's what's on today. Here is the Wi-Fi password, information like that. And you can see my criteria here is all computers that are enrolled in the JSS, limited to being able, those computers that can see the Allen Hall beacon. So there's my custom event, beacon state change. And I've added an exclusion. And that exclusion is you must be able to see the Allen Hall beacon. Oh, shouldn't be an exclusion, actually. An exclusion, what I would be using if I wanted it to be triggered if they can't see it. Oh, sorry, mistake my slides there. So pretty much you can only set up configuration profiles for iOS devices at the moment in the JSS that can be triggered by the iBeacon. And it would be really, really great. You can set a mass action against computers that, so you know what mass actions are in the advanced search area? There's an action button and you can send out notifications and things. You can do that manually. It would be really great if that would be something that could be automatically triggered by the iBeacon going off, by the iBeacon criteria being triggered. We can't quite do that yet, but I've got a good feeling that'll be coming soon. And it would be also great if smart groups could be controlled by iBeacon ranging information. That's just a little wish list of things that I'd like to see. So here's an example of how you might set up an iOS policy for a conference. So this is a policy, a profile rather, configuration profile for enrolled devices I've set up for iOS. My goal is I want to install the calendar automatically on people's devices when they arrive at the venue and configure their wireless network automatically because their device can see the beacon. Oh, and give them a web clip to the mobile website for the conference. So I configure that, my SSID in the JSS, and then I just do the same thing for the conference, which is my calendar, which is my agenda for the day. This is something I actually did, by the way, and it worked very, very well. And then I set a little web clip to the conference website. And then I broadcast a thing called a Dartle beacon. Now, Dartle is a little app that I had on my device. So I just set up an iPad broadcasting the beacon because I found it had better range than the other hardware beacons I was using. And I had that in the doorways to the conferences. So people could walk up and interact with the iPads and look at the conference agenda and everything. It was also broadcasting a beacon for those enrolled devices that could then be automatically set up by people arriving in the venue. So here's an example of it happening. The beacon triggers, that's broadcast, and the self-service tells people welcome to the session that you're in, and people get the subscribe calendar, the web clip, and the Wi-Fi configured automatically. Now on OS X, it gets a little bit trickier because there isn't, while an OS X device can recognize a beacon, the OS X isn't really designed to do anything with beacons the way that iOS is. But that also gives you a lot more room to play because you'd simply need to set up your own daemon that's listening for any beacons that are in the room. So a daemon is a background process running on the computer. And you can do pretty much whatever you want. Now, this used to be somewhat tricky. You used to have to write your own software in order to really get some power out of your laptop seeing a beacon. But happily, Two Canoes have released for free this proximity D daemon, which will basically run any script when it sees a particular beacon that you've set up, which basically, there's nothing you can't do with that. And you can push out these proximity D commands from your JSS. So we've got, back on my campus, we've got a number of policies and profiles configured that use proximity D, which is automatically installed in all our enrolled devices, to trigger certain actions when a laptop enters a particular area. So here's an example of using that. So this clicker is very handy, right? And you've seen a number of people in the past, I'm sure, try and use their iOS device with like Keynote Remote and stuff to change slides on their computer. Now, the problem with doing that is you can't really do that unless you're on the same wireless network as the computer. So you need your phone on the same Wi-Fi as the machine is, and maybe there's no Wi-Fi in the venue, or maybe there's Wi-Fi connectivity issues. So what I like to do is I've got a little device called, I've got a little home rolled app that simply broadcasts 2 beacons. And I have a proximity D daemon running on the computer I'm presenting off. So I've got a start button here that starts either beacon triggered. All it does is trigger a left arrow key and a right arrow key using proximity D on the device that I'm presenting from. So that means using beacons and some very, very simple scripting, I can move backwards and forwards between my slides without my iOS device being on the same wireless network as the computer. So that I just have to have Bluetooth turned on this, and that's it. It works really, really well. It means I've got lots of range. I don't have to worry about losing control of anything. I don't know why I did that. An animation of buttons going up and down, it's not particularly useful. Using JSS, excuse me, using JSS policies with iBeacons is even more powerful. So imagine I wanted. Now, when I took this screenshot, I noticed that my battery was nearly flat, which was really bothering me, so I drew over the top of it. Now I can actually concentrate. If you're like me, that's a real problem. So essentially, I've got 4 policies here and 4 buttons. I call this Big Beacon Boss. And when I'm wandering into a staff member's office and they've got some kind of problem, I need to do something on their machine. I've got 4 policies here in my JSS, and they're all triggered by particular beacons. So I broadcast the beacon from my device, from my iOS device, and it triggers something on any enrolled computer. And because the range is narrow, it's usually the device of the room I'm in. So I can start a terminal session that pops up on the screen logged in as root automatically. I can tell it to report the hardware details of the device onto the screen. So I can see, all right, this is an 8 GB MacBook Pro, or I can see what operating system variant they're running, whether they need any updates. I can tell it to auto-configure ARD, so someone downstairs can log in. Or I can load our password changer. As an aside, we bind our computers to Active Directory, and we, to solve the keychain problem, what we do is we've got a proprietary password changer program which just uses the security command to update everyone's keychains. So, I mean, that's a good approach if you do have to deal with Active Directory binding like we do, and you're facing the keychain problem all the time. You simply use the security command. You can update every level of the, well, I won't get into that too much, but it's a solvable problem. Active Directory binding can be quite painless. So most of the commands being used for each of these are just simple little scripts that are being run by the policies as one-liners. You didn't even have to write whole big long script commands to do this functionality. So we've got a sad academic, and he is overseas at a conference somewhere, and he really, really wants to install an application on his computer. and he doesn't have admin access. He needs it for a few moments to authenticate some piece of software. So I can create a policy on the JSS, and I can trigger it I can get him to install on his iOS device this Dartle Beacon program. So this is a free piece of software which simply broadcasts a beacon. It's a nice little fun way to explore beacon technology. Install it on your iOS device, and you can broadcast and receive beacons and see it all working and look at ranging information. I can tell him to install that and give him a major and minor code to plug into that app. Then I simply create a policy using this temp admin script in my JSS. I tell it to recognize the major and minor code that he's going to broadcast, and I set it to be triggered on seeing a particular beacon. I save that, and once my academic here starts broadcasting that beacon, and he gets 90 seconds of admin time, which is long enough for him to type in his password, password to authenticate his app install. So that's just a hypothetical use of how you could use someone broadcast their beacon to enable extra action via the JSS that you might not otherwise use. Yeah, I'm conscious that we probably have more questions than I have slides. So let's roll straight into questions now, shall we? Does anyone have any? Have I explained? Yes, sir.
Just a note, in 981 of the JSS, you can limit configuration profiles, both computer and user specific, or level rather, to iBeacons and exclude it.
You can in advanced searches. You can do that in smart groups now?
No, configuration profiles.
Yes, sorry, yes, you can do it in configuration profiles.
Earlier it sounded like you said.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. You can set them up as an exclusion limitation, yeah. No, it's the smart searches area where you can't currently set them up. Yeah. Questions? Yes, sir.
Can't you leverage the notifications so when a person walks into the beacon, say, hey, you joined so-and-so beacon, and can you set up another policy so when you walk away, you have left the beacon?
So the question was, can you set up a policy so that when you enter a beacon, a certain action happens, and when you exit a beacon range, another action happens? The answer is, at the moment, not directly from the JSS, because the policy is triggered simply on enter and exit, but it doesn't tell you which one it was. But you can use the exclusion limitation criteria of particular profiles to sort of mimic that. So what that means is you can, when you set up a policy or a profile, you can set it up so that a policy is fired by a beacon limitation, which means it needs to be able to see the beacon in order to go off, or a beacon exclusion, which means can't see the beacon in order to go off. So you can roll back changes that you've employed with a beacon by setting it as an exclusion rather than a limitation. Yeah, no, it's a bit tricky. It would be great if the state of the beacon, whether you're in the beacon's range or out of the beacon's range, was passed in order to set policies and profiles. But unfortunately, that's not available yet. But it does mean you can walk into a room and have a device auto-configure and then revoke those changes when the device leaves the room. So I don't know who was here for the previous session, but the chap was talking about notifications going off on devices that left his library when they were taken out of range. And that's something you could easily do with beacons. You walk up someone, you loan someone, say, a library laptop, and it's configured for certain actions, and then when it moves out of range of the beacon, then the box will pop up saying, oh, you're not in the library anymore. Nothing's going to work anymore. Please return me. So, yes, question? Yes?
Sorry, explain a little bit more about the keychain issue that you were experiencing.
So the question was around keychains and I assume Active Directory. Yeah. So, I mean, like everyone else who has to bind to Active Directory, the big problem with password policies is when the password is changed, the Mac is never notified of the keychain being of the password being updated. So when the new password is used to log in, the keychain isn't unlocked. So all those passwords are stuck. And if you're academics or anything like the people I take care of, If more than 30 minutes has gone by, they cannot remember what that old password was, so you may as well junk that keychain. So what we do is, the university's usual policy for changing passwords is to do it through a web page. That's how we train people to do it. But if you do it from a Mac, a big box pops up saying, oh, you're on a Mac, you don't want to be doing this. Instead, you want to go into self-service on your Mac, and there is a big button there, change university account password. And when they hit that button, an app is downloaded onto their computer, which walks them through the password change policy. So that basically just accepts their old password to verify who they are, gets a new password, makes sure it's compatible with the password policy of the university, and then we use DSCL, and the security command, and just a simple Apple script to go through the keychain, update their printer passwords, update their Wi-Fi passwords with the new password, and update their Active Directory password with DSCL. So once that's all verified and the changes are saved, and that's it. So their keychain's updated, Active Directory's updated. Yeah? Is that clear? Oh yeah? So what this kind fellow just told me was that this is going to be hopefully a solved problem in the next, that would be fantastic if it was. Well, yeah. So I come from the bad old days of golden triangles and augment records, and I have a lot of pain and battle scars in this field. Questions? Yes, sir. Okay, which one? Yeah, great idea. So the question was, how can I use iBeacons to work with AirPrint? Now, that is reasonably easy to do if all you're worried about is just setting up a queue on the device. So all you have to do is set up a configuration profile and your JSS that has AirPrint queues listed, and once it becomes within range of the beacon, that's just pushed onto the device. Using a configuration profile. But you can get even more clever. So what you can do is you can set up what's called a DNSSD server. Has anyone else heard of that? No? Good, okay. So you've all heard of Bonjour, right? Bonjour is how AirPrint printers are advertised on a network, and you all know the pain of enterprise networks that lock down Bonjour so it's not visible. So, you go into most campus wireless networks or enterprise wireless networks, and Bonjour has been restricted by network admins. So you can't see the queues, the AirPrint queues, which is a big problem if you want to enable wireless printing and BYOD. So there is a subset of Bonjour called DNSSD, DNS static advertising. And you can configure a DNS server, any kind of bind-based DNS server, to advertise these static mappings to AirPrint queues. And what you can do with, so basically your DNS server is also pushing out these Bonjour advertisements for queues. It's very simple to configure, but what you can do with the iBeacon and AirPrint is you can set it up so that if you come into a room with an AirPrint printer, you can push out a configuration profile to the enrolled device to tell to join what might be a hidden wireless network that contains that DNSSD server, which pushes out the queues that way. So essentially what you're doing is you're walking into a room and you're getting a whole new DNS server, which is advertising a whole range of new services which aren't available anywhere else except that room. So it's a bit of a workaround, but it works with services other than AirPrint. So AirPlay and Apple TVs is another way to immediately have those broadcast and advertised to devices, even if they're not browsable via standard Bonjour. Have I confused you all, or did that make some sense? Essentially what you're doing is everyone's connected to the same wireless network, but you're connecting to a different DNS server. That DNS server change is being pushed out via configuration profiles from your JSS, and it's triggered by an iBeacon. And that DNS server is advertising extra functionality for that particular micro location based on the iBeacon. And I can explain a bit more detail if that wasn't clear. No? Okay. Next question. Yes, sir.
So could I create beacon on tech's iPhone so when they're within range of an enrolled computer, they would have admin rights, like you say, for 90 seconds, and then later when they leave, their admin rights. So there's no standing admin account on that phone.
So the question is, can you set up a beacons and a policy or a profile that will enable admin access on a device for a fixed period of time, or for when they leave, or have it last until they leave the beacon's range? The answer is yes to both. The easiest way to do it for a fixed period of time is simply script it in. So the way we do it is you walk up to, the beacon triggers the escalation in privileges. So that's simply a change from your primary group ID to the admin group, which will allow you to authenticate against, say, an application install box. And then there is some kind of timer running in the background that's part of the script, which de-escalates the privileges afterwards. You can, however, set it a second profile so that when, if a device that was within range of the beacon would be administrator enabled until it left that beacon's range. That's possible too. You'd use the exclusion and limitation criteria in the profiles to set up either behavior. So you would simply write a little script that escalates someone's permissions to admin. Initially, they would be limited to within range of that beacon. So the device would have to come in range of the beacon before they receive that escalation. And then you would set a second profile that was limited to not being able to see the beacon. So when the device left, that profile would be removed.
Yeah, I was hoping the account would be on the machine, that would be an action the JSS would take to create the account this fall.
You would. So the question was, would you need to create a new account to do that? Yeah, no, you could escalate the current account, so the current user's account to admin. Yeah, and that would be something, again, you would do with the DSCL discal command. Very easy to do. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Can you control, like on managed devices, let's just say a phone, control like disabling camera?
So the question was, can you control disabling the camera from?
I'm just thinking like education, like kids walking in.
Right. Yes, you can. So that's a great use of them. So if you're in a classroom, you can wander into so you've got a beacon set up in a classroom. A device enters an enrolled device enters the classroom, which causes the JSS, the self-service app on the device, to trigger installing the configuration profile for that room. And that configuration profile can limit all kinds of things. So you can basically say, okay, the iPad has entered the room. Now, instead of being completely unlocked, it's limited. So the camera doesn't work, or it goes into single application mode. Only one application will work. In that regard, it's a lot like the way Casper Focus works, with configuration profiles being pushed off and on, except it's contextual to whether or not it can see the iBeacon. So yes, you can do exactly that. You can set it so that websites like Facebook are not available while the device is in that room.
So, second part, now that you said that, but you said that once there's no on and off, right?
Yeah, right, there's no on and off in that you can't set a trigger based on whether it's entered or exited a region. There is an on and off based on whether you set up limitations and exclusions on whether or not it can see the beacon. So you can pull that profile off when the device can no longer see the beacon.
So, okay, so you, like, let's just take the bathroom example. Like, how would you even, like, in the bathroom, you set up one that says disable the camera, and then somewhere out of the bathroom, far enough away, one that says enable the camera?
Yeah, that's so essentially you can set it up so that when the profile is only running on the device, if it can currently see the beacon, yes. And then once it goes out of range of the beacon and can't see it anymore, that profile can be removed automatically.
I think the confusion is coming in here with the difference between policies and profiles.
Yeah, Quite correct, yeah.
What's the polling time on the beacon?
So the question was, what's the polling time of the beacons? The beacon is, they say it's always broadcasting, but really you're quite right, and it's device dependent. The ones that run off batteries, it polls, I think, every 2 or 3 seconds. The ones that, those batteries, they last forever. You know, it's extraordinarily low power technology. The ones that run off USB, those do broadcast all the time, so perpetually.
You can actually configure that for battery life on some beacons.
Yeah, that's right. So there's the beacons I like by a company called PassKit, the little USB ones. You can configure a lot more than just the standard iBeacon protocol on them. You can also, they've got a whole lot of extensible fields for things like latitude and longitude if you want to include some really contextual information, and you can control how often it polls. And if you've ever played around with Texas Instruments smart tags, you can really set some granular options in those as well.
AST out of Colorado Springs does that as well.
Oh yeah?
Very nice write-up. They did beacons along the high-speed hill climb with race cars.
Oh, brilliant.
So yeah, it's really, really cool stuff there.
Fantastic. Yeah, so you've got the accelerometer and the gyroscope and the, yeah.
Consumer apps that kind of follow the cars and notifications.
Neat. So I'm talking about a little smart tag device that you can is basically a tricorder of different sensors and things, and one of the things it does is an iBeacon. If you've never looked them up, look up smart tags. They're fantastic. Sorry, yeah, question?
So do you have any good resources for us to go and look at and have like good examples of people using iBeacons?
Yeah. So one company I like that has a great kit for playing around with beacons is Beacondo. So basically, it's a whole development environment for playing around with beacons. And this is obviously outside of the JSS. But Beacondo is a great resource for discovering more about beacons. They give you a very simple environment where you can configure different functionality. You can create little custom apps and test them. It's really, really powerful and fun to play with. Yeah. So the Beacondo, B-E-A-C-O-N-D-O.
iBeacon security, can you have a program beacon to have its own ID, whatever ID you want to put in there, and have really smart kids who notice that and see your little root policy and decide to give themselves root?
So the question was, if you did have a policy like mine, where you have a beacon which can trigger extraordinary access, like admin access on someone's device, or bring up a root terminal, would it be possible for someone to mimic that beacon? The answer is yes. It's trivial. Not my stuff, though. I work in a faculty of education for the most part, so, and even, you know, we're not the computer police. We don't worry too much about it. But yes, you're quite right. It's not secure at all. So if you were aware of the nuts and bolts of that policy, or you were running a trivial app to capture Bluetooth broadcast information, yes. It's not at all secure. It was never designed to be secure. Yes? No, sorry, you sir.
Are the ranges pre-configured already on beacons, or are they?
So the ranges aren't configured on the beacon. Basically, the beacon's broadcast assumedly out to the Bluetooth beacon maximum range is supposed to be about 70 meters, although it's usually a little bit further than that. But it depends on the environment you're in. So basically, there's 3 ranging steps. They don't try and get too granular. The ranging step is you're on top of the beacon. So you're basically touching it. You're within 5 meters of the beacon, or you're within the extreme range of it, which is, however far it can. And you can set, normally with, in iOS, you can set triggers based on the range of the beacon if you're writing your own apps. So you can say only trigger at maximum range, trigger at near range, or trigger when you're right on top of it. But that's if you're writing your own apps for beacon triggering. You can't set that kind of granular trigger information in the JSS. But that is part of the iBeacon specification. Yes, sir?
We're currently using beacons
So the question was, can you set up your JSS to look and see whether or not a computer is within range of a particular beacon and export that information? The answer is not easily. You can set up a smart group, an advanced search to get that information, but you can't trigger a mass action on an advanced search. So you can't deliver that information as like an inventory collection into the JSS. You might be able to do it if you, via the Jamf binary and a background process. So yeah, I did play around with that for a little while. I can't remember how far through I got, but I think you can force it as part of an inventory collection. So you could set up a little background process like with proximity D on each device that was monitoring for beacons. And if it saw one, it would notify via the Jamf binary and an inventory collection event the JSS that it was within range. And then I guess you could set up an extra criteria for your smart group based on that new field of information. Yeah, you could probably get something going. Yeah, I think so.
There's a question up there.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Yes, sir.
Kind of dovetailing on the security question earlier, have you heard of good cases of Bluetooth hacking, such as bluejacking, where someone might inject malicious code into the beacon, so when devices come into contact with it, it actually runs that malicious code and breaches the security?
So the question is, can Bluetooth beacons be used to inject malicious code onto devices? The answer is not the beacon specification, because all it is the key is in the name. A beacon is simply a blinking light. You are in this location. That's it. It's not pushing out any information to the device at all. So there's no methodology for code to be injected. The information is actually coming out of the app that's triggered by that beacon. So you've already injected, if there is malicious code, you've already injected it yourself when you downloaded and installed that app. Having said that, there are a number of companies and groups that have extended the beacon specification beyond what it was originally, the initial implementation, which Apple has designed to include things like latitude and longitude and extra fields of information. So yes, it is possible if you're using one of those extended protocols, but of course you'd have to have an app on the device or some kind of background daemon that was processing that information. You can't do it through standard beacon recognition. You think of a beacon as a flavor of invisible light, and so it's a whole spectrum of different colored lights, and your device is capable of recognizing each different one and performing an action based on what kind it sees. And that's pretty much it as far as the initial beacon technology is enabled, but just using that information, you can perform all these tricks which make it seem like there's all kinds of information being transmitted by it. Oh, yes, sir.
How can iBeacon be tied into HomeKit?
Ooh, I don't know. I'm sure there's a number of ways you could do that. So you walk into, I see what you're saying. You walk into a room and the lights turn on. Yeah. Yeah, that's what a good idea.
That's something
You're going to be rich.
for home automation purposes, so I didn't know if that was something that you
I haven't played around with it myself because my home is not automated yet. But that makes a lot of sense to me. You would walk into a room and say you've got an app on your device and it's broadcasting a beacon, and the room starts playing music and adjusting its temperature. Yeah, it's a good idea. Oh, I like it. Yeah.
There's a lot of HomeKit-enabled devices that are coming out, and I feel like iBeacon can take those to the next level.
That's a great idea. Well, of course, then that's a very easy key to mimic to open your front door, yeah. Yes, sir.
It's a company called Robin Power. So essentially, what it's all room that you
Yes, sir?
Before we leave, can you put your scan code up on the screen because some of us are...
Yes, absolutely, yes. Where is that? Go back to that. Sorry, I should put that up as the last frame. Oh, I've gone too far. Yeah, making your own little business cards this way, I don't know how useful it is, but it's a neat trick to keep going. There you go. Ah. 1, 2. Stupid slow animation. Yeah, right. Any other questions? Right, sorry, yes. Sorry, I'm under the lights here, I can't see it.
To add to the home automation question, the reason why I asked if JSS export a list of users is because we have all these smart devices where, like Nest, there's certain regions where you don't need to turn on the schedule. So one thing we're playing around with is trying to see what's associated with the iBeacon and only have all the other devices in that area to be turned on for energy saving. Other things that we're doing is also like have an update station where it's isolated from everyone else. If you want to update your computer and you don't want to click on update, you go up to it, it installs updates. Same thing goes for printers.
Right.
If you've never been to a printer, go up to it, auto deploy the printer drivers, and then you're set to print.
Absolutely. So the question is, well, it's not really a question, but yes, that's a...
That's how you get what's associated with the certain iBeacon, whether to do it inside JSS or use an external.
Yeah. So the question is basically, can you get user contextual information from the JSS based on a device when it comes into proximity to an iBeacon? The answer is yes. You can get that information. Yeah. Okay, thanks everyone. Oh, bring your device up here if you want to see that passcode thing work.